to assume we all want cures or to treat disability as solely a medical issue to be self-ableist. And it's one of the many reasons disabled people don't seek healthcare even when we need it. We're people, not puzzles to be solved. What I want providers to remember is that there is no course, no training, no workshop, no continuing education credit that replaces the experience of living in a patient's body and mind. That is something only your patient will have, and that is something you need to defer to them on.
We are all the experts on ourselves. And so, we all have to, in some shape, way, or form, do a piece of teaching. But for me, when a doctor's appointment is going well, is that I don't have to do as much teaching. I can really just be human in this interaction with this doctor.
Once you add the identities, the search for more providers to understand you becomes quite a challenge, because you just don't want to go in there with anyone. You want to make sure you go into places where you can trust people and they can trust you back, so that you feel more comfortable and safe.
In this video, we introduce you to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, their families, and their providers. Through their stories, we hope to catalyze your curiosity to learn more about meeting the unique needs of neurodiverse individuals. You have an important role to play in improving their care and quality of life, and we hope this video helps you begin to build a more inclusive practice. In the next 25 minutes, you'll learn about the various intellectual and developmental disability conditions and the number of people who live with these conditions, how ableism, racism, and other forms of bias and discrimination create barriers to care and lead to health disparities, and best practices that you can adopt to improve the healthcare experience and outcomes for people with IDD.
Intellectual and developmental disabilities includes a broad range of conditions, such as the autism spectrum, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, intellectual disability, some other genetic syndromes like Rett syndrome, as well as traumatic brain injury or fetal alcohol syndrome, depending on how they manifest. It's a very heterogeneous population. Commonly, you will hear many advocacy groups cite a number like 7.4 million. IEC, Institute for Exceptional Care, believes that number is larger, closer to 10 to 16 million. We include conditions like ADHD and learning disabilities.
Millions of people in the U.S. are living with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Yet healthcare providers are not required to learn about disability and associated complex medical conditions during their medical training. The result is providers are often unfamiliar with the lives and healthcare needs of people with IDD and may feel uncomfortable in their presence. Lack of experience with communities of color and biases and assumptions about race, ethnicity, and sexuality may further undermine a provider's ability to establish a respectful, trusting relationship.
Many people in this population have particular sensory issues, sensitivities to light or to loud noises or to crowded places, which makes them seem like high maintenance to a practitioner or a practice manager. And so, clinicians and professionals who haven't been trained to understand what the baseline typical experiences and realities are for patients with IDD don't feel prepared to meet their needs or to work with them effectively.
Doctors are so accustomed to being the expert. When they walk in the room, they think that's what you expect them to be. And I'm sure it's hard professionally to say, I don't know anything about this. But we know you don't know anything about it. We didn't know much about it, and we still are learning, So a little humility goes a very long way.
People of color with intellectual and developmental disabilities encounter this same lack of understanding about their disabilities, but it is compounded by structural racism and other biases.
Police violence in communities of color, as well as the traumas that goes on in those areas contributes to disability in those areas. And we also have to account for the resources in those areas for disabled people of color in those areas, which oftentimes either is little to none, or the services that are available is not as culturally competent as we would like.
When I feel disrespected, it's sometimes when the question comes like, well, your mom's been in this country for so long, why hasn't she learned English? My mom doesn't speak English. And at this stage, she might not never speak English. And that's okay. That's something that my family has been able to navigate around and has been able to exist within, right? I'm 31, meaning she's done a pretty good job. She kept me alive. But your compassion and your empathy to the fact that she doesn't speak English is of the utmost importance, and your inclusion of her is of the utmost importance.
With medical providers and systems unfamiliar with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's not surprising that we see extremely poor medical outcomes. People with intellectual disabilities are 5 times more likely to have diabetes, 2 times more likely to be obese, 3 times more likely to be admitted to the hospital from an ER, and 2 times more likely to die before the age of 50.
I've had some issues with my uterus, and I'm 31. And this is in my lifetime. This is the first time I've ever had an actual appointment with a gynecologist. And now this is really late in life to have access to a gynecologist at 31. But the fact of the matter is that gynecologists aren't interested in women like me because their clinics aren't accessible, right? They don't have beds that come down to the ground so that I can transfer over and they can look all in my business. Like they're not built for women like me. And when you don't build a structure for someone like me, it's telling. It tells me the kind of doctor you want to be, and it tells me what you're really interested in. Now, this is why a lot of women with disabilities die of ovarian cancer. They don't have access to the people who are looking at their ovaries, who care about ovaries.
Individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities experience multiple barriers that undermine their access to quality health care. Presumptions about disability, race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality that communicate a lack of respect and understanding. Inaccessible medical offices. Insufficient accommodations for alternative communication. Insufficient knowledge of the various systems of supports and services that impact the lives of people with disabilities. For people of color with disabilities, the challenges of accessing quality care are compounded by systemic racism. In a survey of healthcare utilization that looked at over 20,000 adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, researchers found membership in a minority group was associated with decreased odds of having a recent dentist visit with a general practitioner, and a flu shot.
There really is very limited positive spaces in healthcare for me because, again, not only am I disabled, but I'm also a woman of color. And I just don't think that, there have been instances in my life that I feel like my pain hasn't been respected in the ways that it should be, that my concerns weren't heard. And I can't really pick and choose and say like, oh, it was because I'm a woman of color or it's because I was disabled, because honestly, I can't pick it. Like I can't pick where I was being oppressed, although it was happening.
People have a theory that people with disabilities shouldn't be having children. You have to be really mindful that people with disabilities can have babies, we can get married, we can go to college.
For me, I'm a wheelchair user, so are you renting a facility that I can get into? And I don't just mean bare minimum, can I get into it? Are they truly fully complying with ADA requirements? Do you have a scale I can use?
I need extra time during appointments. I need providers to know and understand that I am going to be using my device to communicate. I need to be able to take notes or record what is said at the appointment because I have trouble remembering things. And these are all things that are hard to ask for because I'm scared of having to deal with someone interrogating me over why I need them. I've put off care because the thought of having to fight for accommodations or the thought of having to go through an appointment with no accommodations is worse than the thought of just dealing with a medical issue myself.
I think they know a lot about the medical world, and that's great, but they don't know what my systems look like. They have no idea what it looks like to get a ride to their appointment, to the grocery store, what it looks like for me to navigate a grocery store in a wheelchair. Those are all components to health.
As a medical provider, you can take steps to address the barriers to quality care experienced by individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Become familiar with people with disabilities by taking steps to educate yourself about disability and the complex experiences that shape your patients' lives. Create a welcoming space that is inclusive and respectful of all patients, regardless of race, gender, and sexuality, that is physically accessible and can accommodate the needs of individuals who are hypersensitive to noise and other stimulation. Show respect by acknowledging the individual's full humanity, speaking to the individual, not to their support person, and not talking down. Acknowledge the expertise of lived experience and build a partnership. Ask individuals about the accommodations they need to fully participate in the appointment and make those accommodations available.
I think one thing would be more connected to the disability community in their area or their surrounding area, just to get a feel of knowing that there is a disability community in that area or the larger area, meeting people in the disability community where they at or they hang out at. So I will say, if you see them in schools or their workplace, or if you interact with them at Special Olympics, for instance, or rallies and events that center on disability. If those events does not exist in your local area, thank goodness for the internet. You can also research people with the conditions you are trying to treat. And you could learn about their amazing stories.
Discrimination influences health at all levels, at every level. That's individual or just interpersonal kinds of forms of racism. That is structural and ingrained and institutionalized racism. That is the racism that kind of influences public policy. That is the racism that, you might get from some dude on the corner. That's everything. All of it influences health. One of the first things that people can start to do is, one, recognize that fact. Two, I think of that every time we've been talking about, or every time we talk about issues like this, tends to be a tendency for people to be like, well, I'm not racist. That's not me. That's not how I was raised. I'm not that person. And it's like, okay, listen, I understand people are coming into the healthcare field in particular. You want to help people. You want to do good things. You want to support people and all of that. But you have to come in recognizing all of us have been socialized in the same society. All of us are influenced by very similar biases. And whether you want to or not, whether you're a quote unquote good person or not, you're still going to come in with these biases, and you still have to confront them and actively work against them every single day, every single interaction with every single patient. And that's, everybody has internalized racism that they have to fight against. This is not me coming in like I know all of the answers and I don't have other biases that I have to fight against myself. That's just the reality of living in this country. So I think that some of the things that you can start to do is, accept that, recognize that and recognize that you're going to have a lot of very difficult conversations with people as you start to move towards your journey of being anti-racist or practicing anti-racism. Understand that cultural competency is not something that you can just attain. You don't get to a certain level and you're like, I'm competent now. It's not how it works. You have to keep learning. You have to keep listening. You have to keep growing. You have to keep confronting your own biases and keep working on it literally every day.
Be very, cognizant of the environment itself. Is there a TV blaring in the background? The cleaning solutions, you want hypoallergenic that don't have strong scents and things like that. It's making all levels of staff be aware of sort of how they approach the environment, how they approach people with disabilities. One approach is if you have a quieter room for people that has less distractions and noises around, and it can work very effectively.
I have doctors that not only consider my race and my size and my disability, but also the fact I'm genderqueer and the fact that I am polyamorous as well. And I also have a lived experience with mental health. So those doctors take all that into consideration.
I have a disability, so when it came to not rushing out the room like some doctors do, or not explaining stuff, or not explaining all your options, or what do you feel comfortable with? What do you want? And not taking the time out. She is very the other way. She's hands on hands, make sure that I understand everything, wasn't rushing me, checked on my baby, checked on me, made sure that everything was good.
Talk to the person with the disability, ask them, don't ask the caregiver. Because even if a person can't talk, they can move their eyes, they could twiddle their fingers, they could nod their head. I mean, but you really have to look at a person with a disability as a whole person that has feelings like everybody else, may speak in a different way. They may either move their eyes back and forth, or move their head, twinkle their toes, their hands, their fingers.
I don't invite a lot of people into my kind of healthcare team because I don't want anyone to ever feel like they can make a decision for me. And even if I have to struggle to be in an appointment without someone else, because it's easier if I bring my caretakers with me, right, to help me transfer from the chair to a bed or whatever. But a lot of things I do alone because I don't want anyone to ever feel like they have this power to make a decision for me. Because a lot of people also, when they see non-disabled people with disabled people, they feel like they have to shift.
My doctor, I really like her because she sits there and talks to me, and if I ask her a question, on a certain matter, she'll answer it and she'll go into detail. She makes me feel like I'm a person without putting the disability in front of it.
It's not like you have to go get a special degree in this. It's just meeting the person's eye, speaking to them as a fellow human being with respect, presuming competence. I'm big on presuming competence.
Remember to always see my patients as full people leading full lives, no matter what their abilities or disabilities. Plays right into making a really personal connection.
Part of the making choices is having your voice, having your input. So it's more of a dialogue. It's more so the medical team and I collaborating on my care. That's a good experience. The best way for doctors and medical providers to help new patients like myself who are disabled and Black, Indigenous, and people of color, it's always best to just ask, what do you need? is there any documentations we like to provide outside of the interaction? I think it's also great for anyone, especially for medical providers, to not only research the condition, but also how the condition affects an ethnic group, and even so, how ethnic groups view disabilities.
My life is worth living, and I have to explain this in such different and intimate ways so someone can believe that I have a life worth living. And so to me, respect is up to the highest regard. And when I see it, when I find it, it's like I value that person so much more because they took a second to pause and understand it.
If your patient finds themselves in a stressful situation, in an emergency room or a hospital environment where the providers that are caring for them don't really know them, a picture of someone when they're well, doing things they enjoy in their day-to-day life can be worth 1,000,000 words. That picture can convey who they are more effectively than a lot of the words that we write, especially for someone who, when they're sick, loses abilities, maybe is not able to smile, move, and talk, and show their true self in that moment. That picture helps convey that. If there's a way a provider can upload that photo into the electronic medical record or include that in a prominent way in their medical summary, that helps send that message very succinctly and effectively.
I had a primary care appointment, and it involved having an exam that was immensely overwhelming, physically, emotionally, sensory-wise. And partway through, I just shut down. I couldn't speak. I couldn't reach for my AAC device. I couldn't do much of anything. I managed to ask for a pen and paper, and my doctor was so nice about getting them, making sure I had what I needed to communicate. It's things like that, because obviously respecting my request for an accommodation is one thing, but so is fostering an environment where I felt safe to ask for that. That's something that makes me feel respected. A provider actually listening to and honoring my requests, but also not acting like it's a big deal I need to communicate in a different way.
Yeah, there are times, honestly, in working with people with different abilities, because it's unpredictable, it is more fun. Every visit might actually incorporate things like singing and dancing and sharing of talents. I've actually learned about how to do a better job of working with people who are neurotypical by finding creative ways to connect with people who have disabilities over the course of my visits. I think I probably first heard a patient share a song or a karate move during a visit with someone with a developmental disability, but then it's caused me to start asking about the talents of everybody. And so how lucky are we that we've learned from each other in that way?
Caring for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities isn't so different from caring for other people with complex conditions. If you establish a relationship, communicate respect, and recognize the expertise of lived experience, especially in the context of the complexities of intersectional identities, you can build a trusting partnership that focuses on supporting the person to live a full and meaningful life on their own terms.